The TV show Yellowstone introduced millions of people to ranching, cowboy culture, and the American West. But it also changed the West itself. Towns changed, land prices changed, tourism changed, even the way people dressed changed. And maybe the strangest part of all, the show about outsiders threatening the West helped bring a new wave of outsiders into it. Howdy, Chip Schweiger here. Welcome to another edition of Way Out West, where the stories of the American West are told, cowboy wisdom is earned, and the legacy of the American cowboy still rides on. If you've spent any time in the American West over the last several years, you've probably felt it. Maybe it was a sudden flood of tourists in a small mountain town. Maybe it was a brand new subdivision going in where cattle once grazed. Maybe it was seeing somebody walk into a feed store wearing a Yellowstone jacket they bought online. Or maybe it was hearing somebody say, "I want to move to Montana." Because for a lot of Americans, Yellowstone wasn't just a television show. It became their introduction to the West itself. And that matters. So today on the show, we're talking about the Yellowstone effect. How one television series reshaped tourism, culture, ranching identity, and the modern mythology of the American West. Because stories shape places, they shape identity, they shape desire, they shape migration. And few television shows in modern history have shaped public imagination quite like Yellowstone. After the episode, check out the show notes at wayoutwestpod.com/Yellowstone Effect. Welcome back. When Yellowstone premiered back in 2018, I don't think many people expected it to become the cultural force it did. Sure, it had Kevin Costner, sure, it had beautiful scenery, and sure, Americans have always had a fascination with the West. But this was different. Taylor Sheridan didn't build a traditional Western. He built a modern mythology. A world of ranches and violence, family loyalty and land wars, cowboys and billionaires, open country and political corruption. And millions of viewers responded to it. Some because they loved the drama, some because they missed seeing the American West portrayed seriously, and some because deep down they were hungry for something the modern world increasingly struggles to provide: competence, purpose, tradition, land, belonging. That's why Yellowstone connected so deeply. Not because audiences necessarily wanted to become ranchers, but because they wanted to feel connected to something older, something harder, something real. And once people saw that version of the West, they wanted to experience it for themselves. One of the biggest impacts of Yellowstone has been tourism. Now, to be fair, Yellowstone National Park was already famous long before the show ever aired. People have been traveling there for generations. But the series introduced the Yellowstone region to an entirely new audience. People who may never have considered visiting Montana or Wyoming before suddenly found themselves fascinated by wide valleys, snow-covered mountains, horses, cattle, and ranch country. And the timing amplified everything. During the pandemic, Americans were already searching for open spaces and outdoor destinations. National parks exploded in popularity. Yellowstone arrived right in the middle of that moment. And suddenly, people weren't just visiting the West, they were chasing the feeling they saw on television. Hotels filled up, dude ranch bookings surged, horseback tour companies expanded, and Western outfitters saw growing demand. Even restaurants and bars leaned into it. Dutton-inspired menus, cowboy-themed cocktails, Western branding everywhere. There's money to be made when culture suddenly turns its attention toward a place, and local businesses knew it. So the real-life Chief Joseph Ranch in Montana, the filming location for the fictional Yellowstone Dutton Ranch, became something close to a pilgrimage site. Fans traveled across the country just to see it, to stand where scenes were filmed, to take photos by the barn, to briefly step into the mythology. Because that's what Yellowstone really sells. Not just scenery, identity. One thing Yellowstone absolutely accomplished was making the cowboy aesthetic culturally relevant again. Before Yellowstone, Westerns mostly lived on the edges of Hollywood. You'd occasionally get a remake or a prestige film. But cowboy culture itself, that largely stayed regional. Then Yellowstone hit, and suddenly cowboy hats were fashionable again. Boot sales surged. Western jackets showed up in cities nowhere near ranch country. Brands like Stetson, Ariat, and Filson benefited enormously from the resurgence. And Kevin Costner's portrayal of John Dutton helped turn the old-school rancher look into something aspirational again. Now, personally, I think there's something interesting happening underneath all of this, because people don't usually adopt a style unless they're also drawn to what that style represents. And what cowboy culture represents, at least in the American imagination, is still incredibly powerful. Self-reliance, capability, quiet toughness, connection to the land, responsibility. The myth survived, but the reality still matters. And Yellowstone brought that imagery roaring back into mainstream culture. And you can see it beyond clothing too. More people signing up for horseback riding lessons, more interest in rodeos, more dude ranch vacations, more curiosity about ranching itself. And for many Americans, Yellowstone reopened a doorway into Western heritage that had slowly faded from popular culture. But here's where the story becomes more complicated. Because Yellowstone didn't just change perception, it changed economics. Montana especially experienced a major real estate boom during the Yellowstone era, and not all of it was positive. Wealthy buyers from around the country started purchasing ranches, second homes, and large parcels of land at staggering prices. Some were inspired directly by the show. Others were drawn by the broader cultural movement surrounding the modern West. Either way, land values surged. And ironically, the real-world conflicts started looking a whole lot like the conflicts portrayed on the show itself. Legacy ranching families facing pressure from developers, locals struggling with rising housing costs, and small towns changing rapidly under outside influence. The television version became reality, and that tells you something. Because one of Yellowstone's central themes is the fear of losing the West, losing open country, losing ranch land, losing identity, losing room to roam. Yet the popularity of the show accelerated many of those same pressures. More development, more luxury construction, more roads, more strain on water resources, and more pressure on communities that historically stayed small and rural. And out west, water matters, always has, maybe more than anything else. People often imagine the West as endless and empty, but the truth is, much of it is fragile. Growth changes things quickly out here. That doesn't mean tourism is bad or that people shouldn't move west, but it does mean every generation faces the same difficult question. How do I preserve the character of a place once the rest of the world discovers it? Now, eventually, whenever a show becomes this culturally influential, you start hearing the authenticity debates, and Yellowstone is no exception. Some ranchers appreciate the attention the show brought to agriculture and land issues. Others think the series dramatically exaggerates cowboy life, and honestly, both perspectives are fair. Because real ranching life usually doesn't look like Hollywood. Most working cowboys aren't involved in shootouts, political conspiracies, or dramatic family power struggles. They're fixing fence, working cattle, repairing equipment, managing drought conditions, watching markets, and trying to survive another season. Ranching is hard, like really hard. Long hours, financial pressure, unpredictable weather, water shortages, thin margins. The work itself can wear people down physically and emotionally over time. And that reality sometimes gets lost beneath Yellowstone's cinematic version of the West. But at the same time, the show did accomplish something important. It brought national attention to conversations many Americans rarely think about: land rights, conservation, development pressure, agriculture, water policy, and where their food comes from. And that matters, because the modern West is not just scenery. It's working land, working people, and working economies. And whether somebody arrives because of a television show or not, eventually they run into the reality that the West is far more complicated than the postcard version. And maybe that's the real legacy of Yellowstone. Not that it perfectly portrayed ranch life, not that it accurately captured every aspect of the American West, but that it reminded millions of people the West still exists, not as history, but as something living, changing, fighting, adapting, struggling, still trying to hold on to itself, because underneath all of the television drama, Yellowstone tapped into something deeply American. The fear that once a place becomes popular again, valuable enough and profitable enough, it stops being itself. And out west, people have wrestled with that tension for generations. Growth versus preservation, modernization versus tradition, access versus stewardship. These arguments didn't start with Yellowstone, but the show brought them back into national conversation in a very big way. One thing's for sure: the American West still holds power over the imagination. It still pulls people toward it, still makes people dream, still makes people search for something larger than themselves. And maybe that's because the West has never been just a place. It's an idea, sometimes romanticized, sometimes misunderstood, and sometimes commercialized, but still powerful. And the real story runs deeper than television, because beyond the camera shots and the cowboy hats and the family drama, there are still real ranchers out there, real communities, real landscapes, real battles over water, land, and identity. The West is still wild enough to matter, and its story is far from over. Okay, before we ride out today, we've got just one more thing. Yep, that distinctive call from Buster the Bull means it's time again for our Cowboy Glossary term of the week. And this week's term is buddy sour. Now this one comes straight out of horse culture. When a horse becomes overly attached to another horse to the point that it gets anxious, stubborn, or difficult when separated, that horse is said to be buddy sour. Maybe it refuses to leave the pasture, maybe it hollers nonstop, maybe it just dances around under saddle trying to get back to its companion. And for working cowboys or ranch hands, it's considered an undesirable trait, because a dependable horse needs to stay focused on the rider and the job at hand, not on whether its pasture buddy is nearby. Out west, independence mattered, for cowboys and for their horses too. Thanks for riding with me here way out west. If you've enjoyed this journey through history and cultural impacts, share it with a friend. That way, we reach more fans of the American West. And if you're so inclined, I'd appreciate it if you rate us or review us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, this is Chip Schweiger reminding you the stories of the West aren't gone. They're still out there. You just have to slow down long enough to hear them. We'll see you down the road.